Well, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome from South Asia Watch on Trade, Economics and Environment. Thank you for accepting our invitation. I am Paras Kharel, Executive Director, SAWTEE. And this webinar is the third in the series of webinars that we are organizing in partnership with the Asia Foundation. And this is also part of a civil society forum initiated to discuss common issues of regional interest and to chart out pathways for cooperation at regional and global levels. So to recall, the first webinar in September discussed the master plan for transport connectivity under BIMSTEC. And the second webinar in October discussed the climate change agenda through a South Asian lens in the run-up to COP27, the climate change conference. Now, the agenda for today's webinar is investment issues in South Asia, especially intra-regional investment. Much has been said and written about the low level of intra-regional trade in South Asia as a percentage of total trade, 5 to 6%. That's the headline number that has become almost synonymous with the limited intra-regional economic integration. But integration in terms of investment is also very limited. Investment can potentially foster trade linkages and expand trade, intra-regional as well as extra-regional trade. And there is a feedback loop from trade to investment as well, as we know from the established literature on trade investment nexus, and more recently from a substantive study on investment in South Asia led by Sanjay Kathuria, Dr. Kathuria, who is the lead presenter today. So what are the barriers to and opportunities in intra-regional investment? What opportunities are already being exploited despite the barriers? And what facilitation measures are needed? These are the broad questions for today's forum. We are pleased to have eminent experts from the region in the panel with rich experience in research and policy making. And without further ado, I hand over to Dr. Poshraj Pandey, Chairman SAWTEE, to moderate this session. Over to you, Dr. Pandey. So I guess Dr. Pandey is having trouble with his connection. So I think it will be better to start with the presentation, and later he can chip in. Dr. Kathuria, I mean, he needs a little introduction. In fact, he was a lead economist with the World Bank. He's a leading thinker and commentator on economic integration in South Asia. He has a PhD in economics from Oxford University. In short, he is Sanjay Kathuria of, I would say, a glass half full, fame, of that report fame. And there's also another substantive report on regional pioneers in investment from Dr. Kathuria. So we are privileged to have you here. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Paras, and thank you very much to SAWTEE for this invitation. Thank you, Posh and Swastik. And I'm also delighted to see all my old friends who will be discussing and commenting on the report. And I think most of them are already familiar with the work, but I'm delighted to have the opportunity of this conversation and to have, interact with others from the broader space. So let me get into this without any further ado. So I will make a brief presentation. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. There we go. All right. Okay. So I'm assuming everybody can see and hear. Okay. So, so this presentation today is based largely on the work that I've done together with my co-authors Ravindra Yatawara and Xiao Zhu, and Xiao is still in the in the World Bank, working in the Chief Economist's office in South Asia. So I'm very happy that I hope she's also joining in today. So this work, which was, and some of your institutions were even involved. I think in terms of we surveyed over 1,200 firms in South Asia, those who were investors and potential investors within the region. And many of you, I know certainly SDPI was involved and SAWTEE was involved, and and other think tanks in the region. I think Sanjeev Mehta was also involved. So many of you were involved in this work. So thank you for that. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about the context. Why are we talking about investment, especially intra-regional investment? What are some of the investment regimes in South Asia, in the different countries? Talk about knowledge connectivity, which is one of the big themes in this report. And then, tell you who are the regional pioneers, what we call pioneers as defined in this report, I should say. Pioneers are those who, despite all the handicaps of working in South Asia, as Paras said, trade is one feature, but actually investment is even less than trade, right? So the intra-regional investment is less than 1%, as I will show. So pioneers are those who, despite the handicaps of working in the region, of investing in the region, they went ahead and did that. So we've gleaned a lot of insights from talking to at length, with regional pioneers. We also did some case studies of the pioneers. There were about 10 of them in the report, and you can take a look at that. So the key part, of course, is also looking at possible implications for firms and for policymakers. So let's get into the context. So why should we be focusing on investment and intra-regional investment? So for many of you, this is well known, but for those who are not economists or not so familiar with this space, we know that, as Paras said, economic linkages within South Asia are very well short of potential, extremely short. There's a headline figure, 5 to 6% of intra-regional trade, but it actually goes beyond that, right? There are foregone welfare gains for consumers, for firms, for exporters, for workers, anybody, because trade could be much, much bigger than it is currently. It could be in the glass half full, it could be 3 times the level of 2015. And if you just extrapolate to current levels, you can see, the billions of dollars that are in foregone trade. But outside of the headlines, it is also, the consumers. It is currently what's going on for example, in Pakistan with headline inflation. Somewhere today it says 23%. It was 30% last week. Those kinds of things. Without, I dare say, with trade, the suffering of the people of Pakistan, unfortunately, with all the flood and everything, it would have been mitigated to a considerable extent had there been free and open trade with South Asia and with India. Anyway, so there are lots of opportunities foregone, and there are missing gains for everybody in the region, every country and people in the region. And if you look at world trade, there is a lot of buffeting about. There is a lot of protectionist sentiment globally. We all know about Brexit and former President Donald Trump of the US, all of that, the anti-trade sentiment. And there is an absence of regional buoyancy as a kind of protection or as a bulwark against that kind of buffeting that comes about in world trade because of all that goes on in terms of protectionism. And trade and investment are deeply interlinked, and it's like a virtuous cycle. As there is more trade, if there's a free trade agreement, or even if there's more trade, investment gets incentivized. And if there is more investment, in turn, it fosters more trade, and especially investment of the kind that is linked to value chains. Value chain is trade in parts, trade in processes. You stitch together a garment in Bangladesh, but cotton and yarn can come from India and Pakistan. Managers can come from Sri Lanka, and trade facilitation can be done by firms from all over the region, including from India. So all these kinds of things. This is what a value chain looks like. And this has been the most dynamic part of world trade in the last 20 years. And this is very closely linked with foreign direct investment. Inward foreign investment, what we call IFDI in the report for short, can boost productivity and exports. Outward FDI or OFDI can also boost exports. It can boost resilience. It can boost profit of firms who actually conduct outward FDI. And then there are, in terms of regional integration, there are lots of now opportunities for South Asia because of, there is the climate change and the pressures for nearshoring, shortening the supply chains. As the world searches for alternatives to China, can there be value chains in South Asia? Again, FDI can play a crucial role in those alternative supply chains. And FDI can also help reduce the volatility of trade in the region, right? If it is mediated through trade, mediated through value chains, that is a more sustained and less volatile kind of trade. And another thing that we've found in the report, the region can be a springboard for broader global engagement. And I'll speak more to that in the next few minutes. Okay, so as I said already, there is some fresh hope. There is the case for regional integration, which we economists and me and my friends present in the room, we keep making that case. But this case has become even more compelling in a post-COVID world. There's, in a world that is where climate change has become the problem of our times. So the case for regional integration has become, in South Asia, which is very poorly integrated, has become even more compelling. For so many reasons. And intra-regional FDI amounts to less than 1% of total inward FDI, right? This is a very detailed calculations my colleagues and I have done. And this is unlikely to have changed, in the last couple of years. So of total inward FDI, only 0.6% comes from within South Asia. And in terms of outward investment, also South Asia is a laggard. So of the total investment that South Asian firms do overseas, they only invest 2.7% in South Asia. So in this report, we took an integrative approach to international engagement, right? So we linked connectivity and engagement. And, there are so many different ways of connectivity. There's knowledge, there's digital connectivity, there's transport, and, which leads to reduced trade costs. And then there is this results in all kinds of international engagement, right? So there is inward FDI, there is outward FDI, there are exports, imports, and then there are different kinds of FDI, right? So we in this report, we go in a lot of detail in the different kinds of FDI. There is trade supporting, there's production FDI, there's services FDI, and then there are different ways there's equity arrangements, there's non-equity arrangements, and so on. So in this report, we focused on things that were very understudied in South Asia, more broadly even globally, but especially in South Asia. We focused on knowledge connectivity and on outward FDI. That's been the focus, although, as I said, because it is an integrated approach to international engagement, and all forms of international engagement are linked, because the same firm can do everything. It can court inward FDI, it can do outward FDI, it can export, it can import, right? So the same firm can engage in all forms of international engagement. And this is a critical something to bear in mind as we move forward. So what does the South Asian investment regimes look like? Within South Asia, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka are the two largest recipients of intra-regional investment. Again, the intra-regional investment is not high, as I said, but within that, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh get the highest share. In terms of the outward investment regimes, the story is not very good. They range from mild to very restrictive. And so they're restrictive in Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal. Bangladesh has been easing in the last few years, but and firms are being allowed. But the key word here is allowed. There is still restriction. It is still a case-by-case basis. Firms have to apply to Bangladesh Bank, and and there can be decisions in favor or not in the firm's favor. So, but Bangladesh has been relaxing gradually its outward investment regime in terms of restrictions. Afghanistan, Maldives, and Pakistan, the regimes lack transparency. Again, in Pakistan, the regime is not so clear. And there is, my understanding is a lot of investment takes place outside the kind of books because of the, a lot of Pakistani-based firms, Pakistan firms operate out of Dubai and keep a lot of, use that as a hub, as do in fact Sri Lankan firms operate from Singapore, for example. In the case of India and Sri Lanka, there is automatic approval, so the regimes are the most relaxed. And then, but there are some region-specific policies, notably practiced by India. The inward investment regimes, although the region and almost every country in the region proudly says we are very open, our investment regimes are very open, but they are actually quite cumbersome by global standards. And when you start going into the details, when you go beyond the paper policies, and you start getting into sectors in terms of clearances and so on, then actually regimes start becoming rather cumbersome, both for foreign investors and for domestic investors. But obviously, they're more biting for foreign investors because they don't understand the regime as well as do the domestic firms. And then even for inward investment, there are some region-specific policies practiced by India, notably saying that firms that share a border with all countries that share a border with India, a land border, will have to go through a non-automatic approval process. So broadly saying that the outward investment regime is still largely very restrictive, except for India and Sri Lanka. And a lot of negative inspiration comes from India's 1974 Foreign Exchange Regulation Act. That still seems to, there's a lot of the central bank mindset in the region is still gets a lot of negative inspiration from that regime of 1974 in India, which India has moved well beyond. Okay, now I want to spend a minute on what are the benefits of outward investment, especially from a value chain perspective, because I think it's important for all of us and especially for central banks to appreciate this. So how does outward investment help? It allows firms to develop scale and different scope, different kinds of products. It helps to capture high profit, a high value added segments of the value chain. You invest abroad, it can, some things which are, which are especially profitable in the so-called the smile curve of value added. Then outward FDI can help capture that. You can purchase foreign intellectual property. A lot of Indian firms have been doing that in their global acquisitions. You can achieve greater bargaining power through ownership of your foreign supply chain. You can also get more stability in access to raw materials. Should you think that your supplier is you can't fully rely on your supplier, and there is also diversification of location to reduce exposure to country shocks. And I think Sri Lankan firms in particular have used that tool for resilience, for diversifying location. And there are many other advantages of outward investment, right? So, but these are some of the key ones. So in our report, and this is there's a lot of detail in this, and it will take time for me to explain this, but it just suffice it to say that basically there is, in terms of knowledge connectivity, we ask the firms, how well informed do you feel about the opportunities abroad in your region, right? So we asked these 1,200 firms in the region. And basically, the investment environment is polarized in that they know some countries better than others. India seems to be well known by most investors, above average, whereas countries like Afghanistan, which you see the orange bars, or Maldives or Bhutan, they are the smaller countries tend to be less well known. And there is a similar thing when you look at this question was, how much trust do you have in people from different South Asian countries? And again, it is polarized. But this is what I really want you to leave you with, is that the relationship between knowledge and trust. Trust is important for everything we do in the region, and for trade, for investment. And it seems that the headline here could be, to know me is to trust me, right? So we found that there's a strong correlation between the bilateral knowledge score that we found, that we talked to firms, and the bilateral trust score, right? So this is important. It means that efforts at knowledge connectivity will also go hand in hand with increasing trust of firms. And this is something we'll come back to later. But bear this in mind. So a lot of the times the lack of trust is to do with knowledge. So again, I will not go so much into the conceptual framework for shortage of time, but basically saying there is a gradation in terms of fixed costs, and this is something that is key for policymakers, key for understanding. There are different entry costs of entering into foreign locations, with the lowest being entry cost into exports, and there is trade supporting FDI, and then the most expensive is production FDI. So there is a grading of every firm when they enter a new location, whether it is exports or any other way, there is an entry cost. So what did we find about these knowledge findings, right? We found that investors originate from different sectors, wide manufacturing, wholesale trade, transportation, and there were many different paths, right? For example, SAWTEE Enterprises of Pakistan, they have started with a distribution investment in Bangladesh. They started marketing denim fabric. They started connecting to global buyers. And then 3 years later, they did a substantial production investment, and it's a thriving enterprise. Similarly, from the Taj Group and CG Hospitality of Nepal and Taj of India, they have joint ownership of hotels in Sri Lanka. They've also gone into Maldives, and then the management services provided by Taj from India. And what are the generalizing? So we did some detailed, not only kind of plotting out the patterns, but we did some very detailed econometric work, where we found what are the key features of these investment pioneers. These pioneers that take risks and do invest overseas in different ways. Well, who are the pioneers, right? Who are these firms who go into the region? Well, they tend to be high productivity firms. They tend to be large firms. That close distances seem to matter. That means you're actually favoring regional engagement. The founder, CEO, who has a well-connected network tends to invest in the region, and low communication costs matter, right? But one thing I'd like to leave you with again is that investors tend to have a gradualist path, and their learning from exporting is very important in subsequent part of their journey into getting into investment, right? And if you're part of a conglomerate, then learning from the other part of your business can also provide some knowledge externalities. But key to remember that most investors that we surveyed tend to follow gradualist paths. So that means export history tends to be very important, whether it is a trade supporting investment, whether it is goods investment or services investment, whatever the kind of overseas investment, the history of exporting, that means you've already incurred some of the fixed costs of overseas engagement. That fixed cost then provides you with the initial knowledge. Then you can get emboldened to get into investment. That's key to remember. Investors tend to be gradual and incremental by and large, right? And they often start as exporters. So what are now let's get to the business end of this. What are the implications for firms and policymakers? For firms, it means that, as one of the CEOs told my colleague Ravi, said we start small, but we learn big, and our ambitions are big, but we start small. So there are many different paths, case studies, and our surveys showed there are so many opportunities, so many paths. You can even actually invest overseas first and then come back and invest at home, right? Networks are very important, and investing in those networks, investing in knowledge, connectivity is important. Sharing knowledge within the conglomerate, right? If you are a multi-business conglomerate, it's not, don't take it for granted that somebody else in your firm, in your conglomerate will learn. So within the conglomerate, knowledge sharing is important. Some other head of a business part of your conglomerate can become an overseas investor if knowledge within the conglomerate is open and free. And there is a role for investment intermediaries, we find, because of this sticky knowledge issue. But let me get to the policy side now. In this report, we provide firm foundations. So some of the things that policy may have taken intuitively, but we provide some firm foundations for that, micro-theoretic foundations for that, but also new suggestions as to what policymakers might do. And we focus on knowledge connectivity, deregulation of outward investment policies. We talk about smart inward FDI policies. We talk about institutions, what kind of institutions can execute these policies. And we also talk of digital connectivity, right? So, and I'm not going to elaborate on this, unlike the other aspects, which I will elaborate. So on digital connectivity, because remember, given the link between trade and investment, remembering that exporters can also become investors. So anything that helps trade also helps investment, right? In the subsequent period. So accelerating and continuing smart initiatives that were taken in the light of the pandemic to reduce costs, to reduce transaction cost of FDI approvals, using digital means for trade facilitation, all of those initiatives are not only linked to FDI, are not only linked to trade, but also linked to FDI. So let's continue those and accelerate those. They will be good for both trade and investment. Now let me get into knowledge connectivity, which is, it's at the heart of this report, right? Development of networks, right? So information dissemination, matchmaking events that, we often do, but again, it could be done in a more deliberate way, in a curated way. Industry veterans are a gold mine of knowledge. I don't think they're tapped enough. They're very willing to share their experiences, but I think they are often just left to, slowly fade away instead of, being used by both by home firms and by overseas firms. So tapping the knowledge that industry veterans have, who are mostly very willing and happy to share, similarly tapping cross-border investors. And in doing all this, there is no need to actually create fresh institutions. You can use existing bodies for both inward and outward promotion, right? Embassies, high commissions, the boards of investment, export development boards, all of these are already there, and they can be used to promote outward and inward foreign investment. Deregulation of outward investment policies, I think it is it is becoming important, and it is, I think, the countries that face macroeconomic constraints, the central banks will often cite that as a problem. But I think that is a very short-term way of looking at things. We have to help create an understanding that outward investment is an integral part of international engagement. It's integral to firm resilience and the competitiveness of firms, right? And Sri Lanka is that, despite all the problems in Sri Lanka, their firms have used outward engagement, outward FDI, outward global platforms for enhancing their own competitiveness, right? And others can do it as well. So I think countries, central banks can learn from the Sri Lankan example that the macroeconomic environment should not become an excuse to create constraints for outward investment. I think it is time. It is these policies which have taken inspiration from 50-year-old policies. I think they really need to be seriously reviewed. Now, again, smart inward FDI policies, right? Focusing, again, given that whole apparatus that I talked about, the microtheoretic apparatus of entry costs, right? Entry costs are a huge deterrent to all kinds of international engagement, but especially to FDI, right? So why not focus on foreign investors that are already in the region? For example, India has most global anchor investors are already present in India. So instead of going to the US or to Germany, why not court the regional heads of firms that are already present in India from Germany, USA, Europe, Japan, etc. Right? Instead of, so other countries in South Asia can go to India and to court these firms because they've already incurred the fixed cost of investing in South Asia. And there can also be others that are present in low-cost mode. That means exporters in your desk. So actually, you don't even have to go anywhere. There are firms who are already exporting into your country. They could be your next foreign investor. That's what our report is showing, right? So court them. So they are already working in your country. They have incurred a lot of fixed costs, right? And similarly, those who are present in low equity mode, low cost equity, like a franchise or distribution, they could well become the next, production investor. And work with those who have knowledge of such partners, right? So, commercial wing of embassies, the boards of investment, the commerce ministries, and so on. So these are ways to low cost, but could be very effective inward, what we call smart inward FDI policies. So let me just conclude by saying that that we all know that there are welfare losses, as I elaborated at the beginning, from inadequate intra-regional cooperation, trade, investment, services, people-to-people connect, all of that is inadequate. Some bilaterals do it better than others, but broadly for South Asia, even for the most thriving of bilateral relations, this is well below potential. Now there are even more compelling reasons to engage in the region. With COVID-19 has accelerated the earlier trends to value chain diversification, the so-called nearshoring, friendshoring, climate-related pressures to shorten the supply chains. There's also reduction of long-term air capacity. There is or long-distance air capacity. There is rising trade costs and so on. All of this argues in favor of more regional engagement. And outward FDI, which has long been neglected, is as much a part of international engagement. I think this is one of the burdens of our report is outward FDI is a critical part of international engagement. And knowledge connectivity is a key part of low trade and investment in the region. There is some promise in the regional pioneer story that I presented to you. We have found that out of those 1,200 firms, 65% of the first investments were actually within the region, right? But those are very small in volume terms. So, if you look at it in actual dollar terms, it's dominated by, in dollar terms, it's outside the region. But you look at it in terms of number of investments, there is a lot of promise because of this small incremental approach to investment. Firms do first get into the region, right? Based on the approach of cautious and incremental outward engagement and knowledge gathering. And policymakers can then encourage this so that this can become a herd effect, right? So right now it is just what you might call green shoots. How can you make that into plants and trees, right? So create a herd effect from this initial promise. And all the policy suggestions that we have made are very light on the exchequer. They demand smart and sensible policy reorientation rather than spending millions and millions on new institutions or doing expensive promotion. So thank you all. This is the report. It's freely available on the World Bank website. That's the beauty of so there's at least the World Bank is doing its bit for knowledge connectivity in the region by providing everybody with free access. So look forward to interaction from my good friends who are present and from the rest of the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kathuria. So let me just point out that Dr. Pandey, who is supposed to moderate, is still having problem with his connection. It looks like there is a problem with the device itself. We are trying to fix it, but let's be prepared for the eventuality that it won't be. But he sends his regret. And at the same time, as far as possible, you will be tuned in. Now, from what I gather from Dr. Kathuria's presentation, the glass is not entirely empty on the regional investment front. And thank you for unpacking the report on investment. You have presented the theory, the empirics with a lot of examples. It's a bulky report, delicious for trade economists, but we have also tried to demystify it, even for non-specialists, with good examples. And we have highlighted the nexus between trade and investment, and pointing out that trade or exporting has led to investment in South Asia itself. You have also identified the importance of knowledge connectivity, which can be an avenue of reducing cost for exporting, fixed cost for exporting, as well as fixed cost for venturing abroad. And one takeaway from your presentation, as I see it, is that the inward investment regime in South Asia is improving, markedly over time, whereas on the outward, investment front, it is still highly restrictive, but with heterogeneity across countries. And one, positive good thing about the report is that it brings into focus a hardly discussed issue of outward investment, because people usually focus on inward investment in such discussions. And you also pointed out an interesting fact that outward investment is happening within South Asia in some countries, despite even legal bans, right? And there are pioneers. And the question is how to bring these pioneers, who may be in fact be violating the law, into the legal net. From what I read in the report and your presentation, there are small outward investments that taking place in the trade supporting investment category. For example, liaison offices abroad, branches abroad, which may allay balance of payment concerns of countries that are reluctant to open up ODI. And the examples that you have provided might provide some inputs to policy makers. Now let me turn to Professor Mustafizur Rahman. Mustafizur Rahman is Distinguished Fellow at the Center for Policy Dialogue, Dhaka. He also taught at the University of Dhaka. He is an experienced person, has done extensive research on trade integration issues in South Asia, including with a focus on least developed countries. We are delighted to have you on board, Dr. Rahman. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Parash. This is a very good opportunity, and I would like to register my deep appreciation of this invitation to discuss on an excellent presentation by Sanjay, a very good friend. Sanjay, very good to see you. Paras, in introducing Sanjay, you mentioned about the glass half full fame, and I would like to take it from there. And I think that you are very right. In that book, Sanjay has really pointed out a number of issues, and one issue that one of his findings that struck me is that exporting from Bangladesh to Nepal is 1.5 times more costly than exporting from Bangladesh to Sao Paulo. So that is what we are talking about, you know. And Sanjay has taken that discourse forward. You see, a glass half full is not same as a glass half empty. Because when you are talking about, and I was writing the book review of Sanjay's book in South Asia Economic Journal, and I was telling that, you see, if you are pouring water, the glass is half full. If you are drinking from it, it is half empty. The Sanjay is pouring knowledge into the glass. So it's becoming gradually through our intellectual effort led by Sanjay, it's becoming, you know, gradually full. So thank you, Sanjay, for that. And I have really enjoyed reading and also listening to what you have said. And this is very opportune moment also because, you see, 3 of our South Asian countries are graduating from the LDC. Bhutan will be graduating in 2023. Bangladesh and Nepal will be graduating out of the LDC group in November 2026. So we will have to make what I have written in one of my articles. We will have to make a crucial transition from preferential market access driven competitiveness to skills and productivity driven competitiveness. And I would say that FDI driven competitiveness. Let me add to that, following Sanjay. So if we are really losing the international support measures which are in place for the LDCs, be it in the form of preferential market access or the policy space that we have. For example, in case of FDI, the domestic content requirement, which are there in many of our LDCs, which have been allowed by the WTO because we are LDCs, these will not be there. Many of the subsidies which are there will have to be phased out because we have already crossed the threshold. Pharmaceuticals, we don't have to, you know, comply with the patenting and licensing regime, copyright regime, trade-related intellectual property rights, but we will have to do that. So how do you really situate yourself for the post-LDC future? I think I would like to take Sanjay's, you know, inputs and his excellent, you know, suggestions in that light. And if that be the case, what Sanjay has mentioned is very pertinent for countries like us, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal particularly. Now, Sanjay has mentioned, although he has given emphasis on knowledge connectivity, but if I look at the whole you know, presentation, so this is what in nutshell, this is knowledge connectivity, it's investment connectivity, it is transport connectivity, it is people to people connectivity, and all together it is trade connectivity. So if you have efficiency seeking FDI, if you have market seeking FDI, then you can really translate your comparative advantages into competitive advantage, taking advantage of the knowledge that comes with the technology that comes with the FDI. So I think that the results that Sanjay has presented are very pertinent, and for us the insights from the survey what he has mentioned with regard to the small becoming gradually big, the incremental way. If it is incremental, then obviously the state will have to handhold also. So I think that many of the regulations, both at the border, and Sanjay has mentioned with regard to the transport connectivity, at the border, single window, interoperability of the systems, green channels, that will be necessary. Behind the border, Sanjay has mentioned regulations, reforms, calibrating our policies to invite the FDI, both inward and outward. And I would also add, Sanjay, with at the border and behind the border, also across the border, because many of the countries now, for example, the graduating LDCs, they are going for various regional groupings. And in those regional groupings also give us an opportunity to have market seeking investment, because they will get preferential access thanks to FTA for free trade agreements or comprehensive economic partnership agreements. And that's what we are seeing in our region. And that is the strategy that India is taking. That is the strategy that Bangladesh is contemplating with ASEAN, with India, SEPA with India, FTA with ASEAN. So I think that also gives the FDI an added advantage. One issue, I think, Sanjay, when I was reading, the emphasis on export, you have in one place also mentioned the growing domestic market. You see the middle class, the purchasing power. So the FDI coming has, two dimensions. One is coming to countries like Bangladesh, and in order to take advantage of the regional market, for example, coming to Bangladesh, Indian investment is coming to Bangladesh. Adanis are coming to Bangladesh. Bangladesh has given 2 special economic zones to India out of the 100 that we are contemplating. Already in the Mahesh Khali, India has invested $150 million from its line of credit. So it's coming to Bangladesh, targeting the Indian market, taking advantage of the zero tariff that India has given to Bangladesh. So this is one. But at the same time, I think that within the Bangladesh, and is still, for example, Bangladesh is 70% of the economy is domestic market oriented. So that also provides us with a lot of opportunities for the FDI coming to countries like ours. So export oriented, but at the same time, particularly in countries like, for example, Bangladesh and Pakistan, which have big population and growing middle class with purchasing power, FDI targeting the domestic market is also a very, very, very important. With regard to the outward investment, outward FDI, this is something that for South Asia, Sanjay, right at this moment is a very special time that we are passing through. For example, Bangladesh is going for the IMF for $4.5 billion. Our reserves are at a very under challenge. So I think that, and you have mentioned that countries are a bit cautious, only gradually opening up, etc. There are reasons for that. One is what I'm telling is that it is the reserves are under pressure, but also because of lax enforcement of regulations, we have to be very careful with regard to capital flight, etc. And making our currencies convertible in capital account remains a challenging task. But maybe in future it will be, and as you have rightly mentioned, we are opening up. But that's I think a bit we are a bit cautious with regard to that. The last point that I would like to make is that, you see, when we were doing in 1980s, 1990s, the gravity model exercises, and the late lamented Professor Srinivasan was showing that, closer integration in South Asia could generate, billions of dollars. That didn't happen because, as Sanjay very rightly mentioned, distance or language, those things, you need more than that. That's what, the last 4 decades of our trying regional integration in South Asia shows. So that's where I think the knowledge connectivity comes into play. I think that it is so important that Sanjay has pioneered this work, because and that really fills in, one of the gaps, that if you do not have the connectivity about the knowledge, about the market opportunities, about also the difficulties in your neighboring countries, then the FDI and FDI-driven trade will not happen. And I am sure, and Sanjay mentioned very rightly, that if investment is not coming, then also trade will also not flow. And that's what we are also doing. So, but there are opportunities that we are seeing now. And I think I would have thought that Sanjay would be giving a bit more, emphasis on the transport connectivity that is taking place. You see, that has become a really critical element to drive FDI. We are, the BBN motor vehicle agreement, hopefully we will progress on that, but it has been signed and ratified, and the standard operating procedures have been finalized. We are building connectivity between India, Bangladesh, coastal shipping, multimodal connectivity. The Kaladan, Bangladesh is also trying to enter into the Kaladan. So I think that these things are really in place. When the Padma Bridge was inaugurated, we mentioned that it will give the expected returns, whether it is financial return or IRR or economic returns, it will give the expected returns if we can deepen the regional, sub-regional cooperation. If, the Mongla port is being developed, the Padma Bridge, the last great divide in Bangladesh, has been bridged, okay? So sub-regional cooperation, Nepal, Bhutan, Indian, that eastern part, Bangladesh, that also really will help us to also realize the investments that we are making. So I am very hopeful, like Sanjay, a glass, maybe Sanjay, next book, a glass 3/4 filled, maybe, So I think that many things are in place. South Asia particularly is on the cusp of, I think, getting into the new new level of regional cooperation integration. And Sanjay very rightly mentioned production networks, value chains, regional value chains, but these will require, the other parts, the soft parts, this knowledge connectivity, this cross border, so that borders are not choking point, they are crossing points. You see, all these will be required as we go forward, and for that, knowledge connectivity is a very important, I think, a part of that. As long as we know, as I said, the advantages and also the difficulties, we can then gradually. But as Sanjay has suggested, the connectivity between the chambers of commerce, the trade bodies, these are also very important. That's why I was also mentioning, I was mentioning that it's trade, transport, investment, logistics connectivity, but also people-to-people connectivity, knowledge connectivity, that is also becoming very important. So Sanjay, thank you so much. And I hope that we will be enriching ourselves through your intellectual and scholarly inputs. And we will be happy to be part of the journey, this journey, very exciting journey. And as I was mentioning, Bangladesh, for example, and Nepal and Bhutan also, we are getting into a new regime altogether once we graduate out of the LDCs. And this is the time really to take preparation so that the graduation is with momentum and so that the graduation is sustainable. And that's where, and that's the lens through which I tried to read your very stimulating publication. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rahman. I mean, you have very neatly, with expertise, complemented Dr. Kathuria's presentation and also provided your own fresh insights. Thank you for highlighting the issue of LDC graduation, which is really weighing heavily on the minds of policymakers in Nepal and Bangladesh in particular, with graduation slated for 2026, and also in Bhutan's mind. I mean, you have also, I mean, highlighted how FDI-driven, export flows could be the way out to cushion the impact of LDC graduation on the exports of these LDCs. And thank you for, bringing a new insight on the table, namely that the transport connectivity initiatives taking place in the sub-region, say BBIN, how it could help investment, right? It will help investment, and then with investment, other things will, flow in, as Dr. Kathuria pointed out. And you have also, mentioned something that resonates with, especially Nepal, the issue of, the reserves being under pressure perennially, the balance of payment pressure, the concerns about capital flight. Now, these are concerns that are shared by a couple of countries in the region, but the report also has pointed out some ways that could be addressed, maybe start with, incremental or gradualist approach in terms of opening up output foreign investment. Maybe in the course of discussion, we'll hear from other LDCs also on how we can go about this. Now, let's move on to Professor Sanjeev Mehta, who is the head of social sciences at Royal Thimphu College, Bhutan. He has over 28 years of experience doing research, not only in India, but also in Bhutan. And from him, I think the audience will benefit from insights from the Bhutanese perspective also. If I'm not mistaken, he had contributed to the report presented by Dr. Kathuria from the Bhutanese perspective. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kathuria. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this journey that South Asia is going through. And amidst the talk of regional connectivity and regional integration, Bhutan, unfortunately, has moved to an alternative path recently, and that is of more of restrictive policies. Recently, Bhutan's tourism policy has brought about a change, a shift from its previous one, that is high volume and low impact, to now low volume and high value tourism again. So the visas, the rates have gone up. The connectivity has become a problem because the airfare has also gone up. So this is one challenge. Basically, tourism used to be one of the major sectors that contributed to Bhutanese economy and also attracted FDI from the region, especially from India and Singapore also. Now this would be a challenge. Already the FDI inflows are drying up very significantly. And in 2021, the FDI inflows were barely $1 million, falling from about $37 million in the previous year. So this is a typical challenge that we are faced with right now. And in the wake of the current balance of payment crisis and depleting foreign exchange reserves that Bhutan is faced with, they have come up with actually the framework of increasing the tariffs on certain goods that Bhutan imports from the rest of the world. So even the trade policy has become more restrictive. So we have moved from more liberal approach that Bhutan was following in 2010 and early part of the last decade. But now, incidentally, the Bhutan has turned its way towards more protectionism. The graduation, as we're talking about the Bhutan's graduation to the low middle income country status in 2023, definitely would be there, but the challenges would be far more severe than currently Bhutan is faced with. The pandemic has definitely resulted into the Bhutanese GDP is still 93% of its level in 2019. So the macroeconomic indicators are not very promising at this juncture. So this is one particular issue of the local economies, how they are growing up and how the policymakers are reacting to those changes that are happening would definitely impact the whole issue of the regional trade and investment that we have been talking about. So these are the challenges that are very specific to Bhutan. And but looking from more regional perspective, that what we have not been able to do in the past, especially in the South Asian region, and Dr. Khathuria would basically agree or would have its view on that, is the investment treaties that we have. Bilateral investment treaties have not been very significant in South Asia. And I was just looking at how India has signed a trilateral arrangement with Australia and Japan, actually, to cap the supply chains and strengthen the supply chain within the region. And we have already started looking for investment from Japan. Already, I think Japan has agreed to invest about $2 billion for improving supply chains and bringing the supply chain that we have, the industries that we have in China to India. So India is going to be a biggest hub in this particular context, but the regional economies will be able to tap this advantage only when they have a stronger investment agreement with India. I don't know what is the status of Bhutan. It's quite difficult to comment on that. But yeah, the other countries, especially Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and Nepal, could also benefit from this chain, that the investment that would be coming to India, and India have the potential to compete with China or be an alternative to China in terms of various supply initiatives that are coming up. So this is one thing. And yeah, I don't have much to say because from the context of Bhutan, I have very little things to say. It's only a challenge right now. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Mehta, for
and
pointing.
Just to add, Bhutan is also not the part of BBIN. Officially, Bhutan has not joined BBIN also.
Yeah, hopefully Bhutan will.
Yeah, hopefully.
Thank you, Professor Mehta, for bringing to the fore recent developments in Bhutan with regard to investment, and we'll come back to you later with comments, questions that may be posted by the audience. Now let me turn to Mr. Radhesh Pant. He was the first Chief Executive Officer of Investment Board Nepal. I mean, he has a unique experience. He combines rich experience in the banking sector with policy-making experience. And in many aspects of investment, he is an authority. And currently, he is Senior Managing Partner at VRock. So, Mr. Pant, over to you.
Thank you very much, Parasi. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Sanjay, for a wonderful presentation, and the two professors for their comments. And, I think I always feel that there's a lot that can be done at the, regional level in South Asia. I'm not really an academician or economist for that matter, but I can share some of the experience which I had while I was the CEO of the investment board, and also in general regarding investments. I think a lot has already been put on the table. We see a lot of synergy. That a lot can be done because of the population, because of there is just so much that can be done in the region in terms of resources, in terms of being a hub. Very competitive, that can be competitive to the international level, I guess. Now, I feel one of the things that I've always felt was that, in this region, somehow we always, we don't have we have policies which are, I think, pretty good. I mean, Nepal has great investment policies, so to speak. But when it comes to implementing those policies, then there are a lot of hurdles. I think same may be the case in other parts of the region also. I felt that Nepal, having so much of opportunities, and especially in the hydro sector, somehow we just have not been able to develop hydropower in Nepal. And to give you an example, I'll just take an example of concession agreement that we had signed. Nepal had signed with GMR, so to speak, a Karnali project, from which Nepal was really getting a lot of revenues. Not only revenues, that whole region would have been developed. Now we know that the Bangladesh also wants to buy 500. It's a 900 megawatt project. Bangladesh wants to buy 500, but however, India, it has to go through India. So for the past couple of years, that has been going on, and I just believe that it's not rocket science, because India would benefit from the revenues. Bangladesh needs it, the clean energy, and Nepal, would be great for Nepal. I mean, in general, development in the Karnali region, which is the poorest region. So, I mean, when I step back, I think I can think of a couple of things. One is, of course, alignment of policies in the region that is required. We have SARC, we have BBIN, we have many other institutions, but I think there has to be some kind of, I wouldn't say agreement, so to speak. I think the regional, the heads of the governments need to come together in identifying in which countries, what is possible in which countries. We have strong private sector, especially in India. I think they're investing a lot abroad also. But when it comes to investing in the region, there's always some kind of issue, and that's where I think the governments can play a lot of role. Secondly, I think because we are a poor region comparatively to other parts of the developed world and all that, we have not we really have not educated our people as to what investments can bring to them. I always tell my people that unless and until you satisfy all the stakeholders, you win the hearts and minds of the people where these projects are happening, it is very difficult to get any projects done, because we're all most democratic countries in the region. And then in democracy, it's easy to get straight away. So I think one of the things that we need to do as a region is also maybe the leadership of the region. We need to really come out together and say, okay, these are our priorities for the region. These are our projects that we're going to do, which is going to benefit not only the country, but the overall region, and there's a lot of opportunities, like I said, in the region. The other thing that I also felt was that while, in all these, the agreements that we have, for example, I think Professor Mehta said that rightfully, there's got to be good bilateral, multilateral agreements, which are not really in place. Even with Nepal, I think, I don't think we did pass one from the parliament for bilateral agreement with India, but I'm not sure whether that has really come into effect or not. So these are few things that I want to mention, and you're absolutely right. There are a lot of companies Indian companies, especially in Nepal, that are doing really well. Dabur, is exporting to India. It's actually fulfilling the demands of the Nepali market. GMR is another one, I think. And I think Sanjay had mentioned in his presentation also. Once if GMR is able to do this project, can take it forward, they would definitely be interested, in doing other projects. It could be airport projects, it could be other hydropower projects, transport projects. And as we can see, Arun 3, which is another hydropower project that we had signed the concession agreement, it's really taken off. I think 90% of the work, I wouldn't say 90%, it's supposed to end by the end of 24, maybe 85% of the work has already been done. Now, Arun, the Sutlej, they're also been commissioned for another project, Lower Arun, which is another 400-500 megawatt. So definitely, if we can crowd in these kind of investments, I think that's the way to look at it. But I feel that at the political level, no matter how good agreements we have, how good good policies we have, at that highest level, I think the leadership they have to come together and really step back and say, okay, if we really want to develop this region, these are the things that we need to do in terms of policy alignment, in terms of projects, in terms of like the sharing of revenues, in terms of a fair distribution of benefits. And I think that's what's really important. That is all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Panta. Thank you for sharing your experience in bringing in investment into Nepal in challenging times when you headed the Investment Board of Nepal as its first chief. And you have highlighted the demonstration effects associated with potential demonstration effects associated with attracting a couple of big top investors. You have also highlighted the need for awareness on investment opportunities and potentials in the region, and importantly, to educate all stakeholders that all stakeholders need to be brought on board if certain major decisions are to be taken. And I think this goes to the heart of some of the issues and recommendations made in the study report, namely with regard to liberalizing the regime on outward foreign direct investment, educating stakeholders that there are certain benefits and that we could take a gradualist approach. Thank you. Now, let's move on to Dr. Waqar Ahmad. Dr. Ahmad is a former civil servant and currently Joint Executive Director, Sustainable Development Policy Institute. Again, he has, like other panelists, rich experience in policymaking as well as research. Over to you, Dr. Ahmad.
Thank you, Dr. Paras, and let me start by thanking Dr. Sanjay Kathuria for a very comprehensive presentation, and I have been very fortunate to be part of the survey work which was conducted in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, and he was kind to include us in that exercise. So really happy to be part of this discussion here. And I think I'll take lead from Professor Mustafizur Rahman, and where I think he has pointed out to it some very important reforms urgently required. And I think one of the key messages that come out of the report is that whether it is inward FDI or outward FDI, the regime the welcoming regime which is required, the mindset change which is required in the region to welcome investment, that is not something which is rocket science. We know the solution, we know the recipe. It's perhaps more than the technical recipe, it's also a function of political will going forward, which is what we now need to exhibit. I think a couple of things which I pick up from Dr. Sanjay Kathuria's presentation, as well as the report, and I think what we had picked up while we were conducting the survey, firm level survey in Pakistan and Afghanistan. First is that, of course, investment is sort of led by pioneer firms. They are very special firms, they're very special individuals who are able to understand the ecosystem, navigate the difficult regulatory regime, and then work their way around it. You know, even if there are missing payment systems in the regions, they will work via third countries. If traffic or transit is not available, they'll make it happen somehow. But these individuals or these firms are very few. And I think it is the knowledge which they carry, which they embody, that is the knowledge which needs to be shared with the firms at a mass scale. I say so because my second point is with regards to the information costs. These are the pioneer firms who have over time overcome those information costs, which probably new players in the region find it very hard to overcome. And information costs are, of course, very closely linked to finding the right kind of conducive network with whom you will participate, whether directly or via, of course, arrangements through third countries, which we have seen. And over the last decade or so, we have noticed restrictions between countries, direct route or automatic route of investment not being available. But it is these pioneer industries upon which we present case studies who have still managed to sort of trade. And I think Dr. Sanjay presented the example of SAWTEE, and we have other examples who continue to trade with India, with Bangladesh, host their operations in those two countries as well, via, of course, registering their entities in the third countries. Whether we should be doing this or not doing this is another question, but all that I'm trying to exhibit is that you have minds and you have knowledge in the region who continue to bring us and the production structures together. Now, going forward, I believe that there are a couple of things which countries need to do in-house. One is to really conduct, or if it is already there, to update the regulatory impact assessments. And our dear friend Pradeep Mehta continues to remind us about the need to regularly update these RIAs, sector-specific RIAs even, or even prioritize sectors where, for example, you feel that there is higher potential of bringing in investment. You should be doing those RIAs regularly to see what are the specific pain points, what are those specific regulatory burden areas which could be eased. And taking on this example, for example, the government of Pakistan is now pursuing PRMI, Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative, under which, of course, we're also pursuing PSW, Pakistan Single Window Initiative, which tries to sort of cuts through all these regulatory channels. For example, textile sector 5 years ago used to face 126 annual renewals, which haven't gone away. We are down to somewhere around 56 annual renewals, but still they're around. The second was to ensure a level playing field. Now, we sort of pick and choose, and it is not just Pakistan which would do that, but many other economies would do. So, for example, for China, we have a red carpet, which we should be offering to any other country. So I think the recipe here is that, as I said in the beginning, either you are open for investment or you're not open for investment. So you can say that for Chinese firms, I am very keen to invite them, or for XYZ firms, I'm very keen. But for the others, you know, you'll have to go through some other channels. And of course, that is a deterrent which it's the business community which ends up paying the price. So that level playing field is extremely important. Second, we have given autonomy to subnational governments in Pakistan to have their own investment policies as well, which is all very good, and they enjoy a lot of autonomy. So Punjab has its own investment policy, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has its own investment policy, and they can engage with their neighbors to pursue that. But what has happened is that they also ended up giving investment promotion incentives, which ended up clashing with the federal incentives. And now we are at a position where we are pursuing with all these governments, all these federating units, that you really need to have a compendium for the investor where you consolidate all these investment promotion incentives. They find it hard to operate in one part of the country and then face a different investment promotion scheme in other part of the country. We have also informed about the dispute resolution systems, which of course the foreign investors continue to talk about. These dispute resolution regime, which is on ground, it has to be in line with the region. It has to be in line, for example, with countries who want to invest here. You cannot have your own country-specific regime, which is not in line with the world. They really want to have legal harmonization, at least some sort of harmonization with the region, some sort of harmonization with peer economies who are at the same per capita or at the same trade level where you are at. We also note that while countries, including Pakistan, focus a lot on trade diplomacy, much lesser effort goes into investment diplomacy. And while the trade expos take precedence, you don't have investment expos at the same level. We don't invest in the same kind of roadshow or welcoming potential investors in the same kind of roadshows that, for example, you see in investment. We also note a lot of agriculture, a lot of SME firms who want to showcase themselves, who want to be part of investment value chains abroad, but can't do that given the expensiveness of such initiatives. I think for think tanks like STPI, like SAWTEE, like CPD, one of the things that we can do on our own, and that was an advice that also comes from the report which Sanjay has shown, is to really have investment trackers which can help our governments. We can come up with biannual or annual investment trackers now that our governments often don't agree with the assessments by bank or by Fitch or by other rating agencies. We as the local bodies can come up with investment trackers, whether or not the manifestos, political party manifestos, or what they had promised with regards to easing of investment regime, have they delivered or not. So we should be producing the scorecards around those manifestos, holding our political leaders accountable that this is what you had written in your election manifesto and about the investment regime, about easing or bringing in investment, and this is what needs to be done, even if that requires some political difficulty. We are also advocating on evaluation of FTAs, given that FTAs or revision of FTAs provide an opportunity to build in the investment clauses. We recently missed one opportunity. We just revised our FTA with China, and the missed opportunity was that we didn't secure the investment clause over there, or even the trade and service clause. So this is something which we are now trying to overcome, for example, in our trade agreement with Turkey. Maybe towards the end, I can also sort of say that local industry in Pakistan sees a lot of potential in outward FDI. For example, our sports goods industry, who has been the leading supplier of FIFA footballs in Qatar this year, our textile industry in Faisalabad, our surgical goods industry, they have been the leading sort of voice when it comes to outward FDI. They want that, just like the textile industry, who was able to locate in Bangladesh, who were able to relocate in China, for example. It is these three industries, surgical, sports, and leather, who now want the same kind of opportunity. So one of the messages that we have been giving to Pakistani government is that let's move away from a textile specific outward FDI, preferential outward FDI regime, to also allowing other sectors to have direct and automatic routes of FDI as well. So I just stop over here with the note or reiteration of my gratitude to SAWTEE once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bakar Ahmad. I mean, it was a great, discussion. Your comments. Thank you for highlighting, the initiatives taken by Pakistan, and many of these initiatives and the solutions that you have proposed are relevant to other countries also. Notably, the point you made about subnational governments in Pakistan coming up with a raft of incentives that may clash with the incentives provided by the federal government. That may have down the line resonance with Nepal, which has recently embraced federalism, and various provinces might jockey with each other in terms of attracting foreign investment. But your experience from Pakistan, might provide inputs to policy makers. And one interesting point you highlighted was the need for, if I may call it, most favored nation based liberalization of investment, right? We often talk about MFN-based trade liberalization, but MFN-based liberalization of investment. Thank you also for highlighting the importance of investment diplomacy, because oftentimes, at least in Nepal, trade diplomacy and economic diplomacy, are talked often a lot, but investment diplomacy is also important. Thank you. Now let me move on to Ms. Subhasini, who is an economist, and she has done a lot of research on trade, on investment issues, on aid issues, and the nexus between trade and investment. Over to you, Ms. Subhasini.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sanjay, for that very interesting presentation. I always consider Sanjay as a South Asia optimist, and I have never been that. I have never had that level of optimism about South Asian integration, whether it's trade or investment. Sanjay has been very optimistic. I won't say I'm a pessimist, but I would rather say I'm a South Asia realist, where I feel South Asians are far better at talking, but very bad at walking the talk. So we have a lot of ambitions, but when it comes to delivery, I think we are very, very poor. So let me start with Sri Lanka. Like Sanjay said, there are some pioneering industries that have really leveraged the potential in South Asia. Apparel tourism stands out, I think, in the context of Sri Lanka. Okay, so I think it's definitely these companies have realized that it has immensely benefited them to weather various risks and also make use of opportunities. For example, Sri Lankan apparel for a long time has been struggling to get into the Indian market because we still are subject to a quota, right, Sanjay? That quota, no matter how much Sri Lankan government has been trying to work with Indian government, the Indian government has not been very keen to lift that quota. So what obviously apparel companies in Sri Lanka finds is because they have invested in Bangladesh, you are not subjected to the same restrictions. So they're really leveraging the access that Bangladesh has, which Sri Lanka is denied, also to access one of the largest and the growing markets in the region. So there are when industries like this see opportunities, but I'm also interested to know, Sanjay, like Waka said, we have only a few sectors and industries other than maybe India. Most of our smaller countries like Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, Maldives, we don't have that many sectors with companies that has the potential and the capacity to invest abroad. So outward FDI is the potential is also limited in certain industries. So I'm curious to understand in your research, when you talk about, when we talk about trade, we say, of course, South Asia trades little with each other, but a lot more with the rest of the world. Do you see that same experience in FDI, for example? Do you see the South Asian companies wanting to invest more in other countries than in South Asia? Or is it that South Asian countries are anyway really beginners at outward FDI and struggle to get outward FDI, maybe because of regulatory regimes. It's not just a South Asian problem, but that it is a general problem. So my gut feeling is that it's a general problem of South Asian countries than a South Asian problem per se. And also I echo the sentiments of Waka, who said that, you know, our policymakers are yet to recognize the value of outward FDI in the same way they recognize the value of exports. Right? Because they don't realize how internationalization of companies, domestic companies, are as good as exporting, that it is actually valuable, but they really, they fear more the negative consequences than seeing the positive. So most of our diplomatic missions in these countries do promote exports, tourism, and investments into the country, but in not really facilitate or think about promoting investments from Sri Lanka or from our countries to the rest of the world. So maybe there is, I agree with Waka, we really need to also see that mindset change. And the other one I also realize is maybe we also need to understand the value of or the capacity of companies in South Asia to navigate the bureaucracy and the systems within South Asia, because we are very much alike in being inefficient, in really how we operate. So there is, I read one paper that said actually third world companies have a better chance of succeeding in other third world companies, third world countries, simply because, they are much more familiar with the systems, institutions, and bureaucracy, and have sort of mastered the art of navigating these compared to maybe the developed world multinationals or the companies. So maybe we need to understand that ability to succeed and to work in other countries. But so I also don't have a lot to add, because I'm speaking after so many speakers that had a lot of views to share. So I'm very, this is all I have. Happy to hear your response about the outward FDI in general in South Asia versus the rest of the world, Sanjay. Thank you.
Thank you, Subhashini. Now you said that you haven't many points, but actually you have raised important questions. Actually, you have raised some important questions, and some of these questions have been directed to the presenter also. And you made a point about South Asia or being very good at talking, but not being very good at implementing. Now, this reminds me of something that has not been mentioned so far. It is the SARC agreement on promotion and protection of investments. Now, if I recall correctly, it is yet to be, fully finalized in terms of negotiation and signed. So, despite that, it seems that some interregional investment is happening. Now, if some of the speakers could, shed light on the status of this agreement and the potential it might hold, or maybe this is not the right time in the current climate to, invest much hope in this agreement. And then you also asked an interesting question, an important question of how to make policymakers realize the importance of outward foreign direct investment. So, these are the questions that the speakers might want to take up. And other participants are requested to post their questions on the chat box or raise their hand. So until any participant has some questions, perhaps the speakers, perhaps the lead presenter, Dr. Kathuria, might want to respond to some of the questions raised by Subhashini, and also the SARC agreement on promotion and protection of investments.
Right. Oh, thank you, Paras, and thank you to everybody, to all the discussants who commented. thank you, Mustafiz, for those very kind and warm words. And I look forward to working with you and all our other friends on continuing to pour more water into the glass. And I thank you for actually adding that point on transport connectivity. And it leads me to the broader point to get to Subhashini's question about her realism on South Asia versus my optimism. I think to work in South Asia, I think you need dollops of optimism. Otherwise, it's going to be a space where you will get, there will be a sense of, what's happening. Why don't I do some, intellectual work on other stuff? But I think so. It is a space one you need. But I think there is a lot of room for optimism, because that's why I'm picking up from what Mustafiz said, that on the eastern side, unfortunately, it is focused more on the BBINS side, where I'm adding Sri Lanka into that mix. There is so much happening in connectivity, both physical connectivity. There's billions of dollars are being spent, but also which is equally important, is the softer side, right? And people have become cognizant of what are the problems on the soft, the non-tariff barriers, the delays, all of that, which those things all add up a lot. So, I think people have talked a lot about what's happening. So I think there is room there. Countries, India is obviously the giant in the room, and India has also realized, and it's putting its money where its mouth is in investing in connectivity, right? In the region. So I think, on the other hand, if you look at the India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, axis or the triangle there, you might be left with some pessimism. But again, those of us who work on the space, who know that there is potential, know that politics has always stymied this. And yet, the point there even is that, look, politics haven't got us anywhere in that space, right? So why don't we give economics and trade and investment a chance, right, to lead that dialogue? Because for politics hasn't got us anywhere, right? At its peak, trade was, at least the formal part of trade was just about over $2 billion between India and Pakistan. Whereas we know that informal trade, where entrepreneurs put their money where their mouth is, right? Informal trade is at least $5 billion plus, right? More than $5 billion between India and Pakistan, and the potential is close to $40 billion. That was way back in 2015. Now it will be much more. Anyway, the point is that I think there is a lot is happening which gives room, and that the global configuration, as I said, global changes are giving a new momentum, if this can be realized, to the search for an alternative to China and so on. I think all these can be very, very helpful, right? So now getting to the specific question, Subhashini, on South Asia's investment, and so it is true, as I said, it is very true that in volume terms, right, or in dollar terms, most of the investment goes outside, and India is the biggest investor by far, right? 95% probably of outward investment goes from India, and they are investing mostly outside the region. But if you look at the number of investments, right? So this survey that was done of 1,200 firms, 65% of first investments were made within the region, right? So that's where the green shoots are coming from, right? So they are small, they're incremental, and that's where policy comes in. How do you help those small guys, right? They are exporters, or they're making small trade supporting investments, not very expensive, a franchise or distribution, but low value investments. But the green shoots are there. There is interest, obviously, in making those, and whether to get over the barriers that you talked about, or otherwise to explore the market directly. As you know, some very successful Sri Lankan investments in the textiles furniture sector in India. So I think there is, again, there can be scope, and this is where, you know, the information, reducing sunk costs, all that we talk about, I think that can be very, very useful. And again, I think thank you to the others, commenter Vakar, for saying that, you know, important to show that that the Pakistan should be moving beyond a textile kind of regime for OFDI and moving into a more broader, because let's face it, there are world-beating firms, world-class firms in every country, right? Whether even in the Maldives, and, you know, certainly in Nepal, we have, you know, a global firm, CG, but there are many others, right? Every country has its world-class firms who can then play that role of showing the way to others, right? So there can become, you know, one or two major players can then show the way to others to venture into that forbidding territory of other countries, right? Where, as Subhashini said, there is bureaucracies and the systems, but countries have done it, and there is a lot of learning, as Vakar also said. So, so I will stop with one comment on what Sanjeev said about bilateral investment treaties, and then, you know, what Paras also asked. I think there hasn't been that much of success. I think bilateral investment treaties in general have not been successful globally. That's the overall experience, right? And yet there has to be some kind of agreement on how do you navigate dispute resolution, right? Because disputes are inevitable, and I think that's a key issue. And I agree with Vakar. There needs to be some practical, you know, recourse for companies. You know, you don't want to be taken to some international court where you don't know the outcomes. That's what countries are afraid of. That's why they don't sign these. India has certainly signed off bilateral, but they have sort of not renewed so many BITs that were in place earlier. So this is an important point. I don't think at a SARC level also this has worked, and it is certainly not one of the successes. One of the few successes that SARC had was on the trade side, right? SAFTA, or limited success, because, as I have said elsewhere, SAFTA is an agreement, I think, in name. There's so many exceptions to free trade, is that, you know, most of trade that goes on within South Asia or a bulk of it goes outside SAFTA. So that doesn't mean that, to me, that means there is not much of that is really not a very workable or working free trade agreement. So I will stop here. If there are any more specific questions, either from speakers or from the more broader audience, happy to engage.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kathuria. So we will be directing questions if we get any from the floor. But in the meantime, I would like to hand it over to Professor Mustafizur Rahman. He might be able to respond to some of the issues raised by Subhashini. And Dr. Rahman, I also have a couple of questions. One is with regard to the state of SARC agreement on promotion and protection of investments. If you have any thoughts on it or any updated information on it, just for the sake of knowledge. And another point which I would like to draw from the report itself is that a report, categorizes Bangladesh among the relatively, restrictive regimes in terms of outward foreign direct investment. It says that even now in Bangladesh, outward foreign direct investment is still limited to investors who are already in the export business, right? And that, however, some reforms have taken place. For example, prior approval or permission of the Bangladesh Bank for opening a branch or liaison office abroad has been waived, right? So what is the state of mind or attitude of policymakers or even economists in Bangladesh with regard to outward foreign direct investment in the days ahead? And I'm asking this question partly because from Nepal's perspective, Bangladesh is an industrial and export powerhouse, compared to Nepal, right? It has industrialized compared to Nepal. And oftentimes we cite the example of how Bangladesh is doing in terms of exports, what incentives it provides, what policy reforms it undertakes, and private sector from time to time, they are also referred to the policy reforms in Bangladesh. So over to you, Professor Rahman.
No, thank you. I think that Sanjay has opened up opportunities for us to discuss these issues and some of the issues that also have been raised by our panelists. But I agree with Sanjay, having been in this business for the last, almost 4 decades, I can see the progress that we have made, but obviously there are reasons for being pessimistic in the sense that the other countries are going forward. I always think about, for example, Vietnam. Now I was mentioning after MBC graduation, for example, we will not get the market access, for example, in the European Union. The import duty on textiles is 12%. So that will be gone. They have given us 3 more years, but that will be gone by 2029. On the other hand, Vietnam, which is now paying 12% duty, since they have signed the Vietnam EU FTA, they will get market access, preferential market access. So the difference, given that the tariff rates are 12%, the difference will be about 22, 23%. So that's what we are thinking about. So we are doing some progress. Particularly, I'm very optimistic with regard to the, as Sanjay has rightly also supported, the connectivity initiatives that are being put in place, particularly in Bangladesh as a gateway from western to eastern to western India, and also to, I think it will we can also access the ASEAN also through these. So I think that these give us some hope. But for us, your question is very right in the sense that the FDI regime, not only, I will be self-critical, not only outward FDI, but also inward FDI. There are many incentives in place, but if you look at how the entrepreneurs, because Bangladesh, is different from some of the smaller countries because we have an entrepreneur class and they have thrived on import substituting often industries, and when they are also export oriented, they would think that they are enough and we don't need FDI. So even for ready-made garments, which is 84% of our export now, even in ready-made garments outside of the export processing zones, Bangladesh did not allow FDI in ready-made garments in the domestic tariff area, even a few years back. On the other hand, we know that the global market for apparels is now expanding in the non-cotton area. But we have concentrated in cotton, which is 75% of our export. But the global market is 75% is man-made fiber, synthetic, polyester. But we didn't attract FDI in that segment as well. Now only we are now trying to catch up. So what I'm telling is that the mindset of the entrepreneurs also will have to change. With regard to the outward, yes, as I was mentioning, this has been put on the card, as Sanjay rightly mentioned. Some of the Bangladeshi groups are also investing in Ethiopia and some of the African countries, so that they can take advantage of the AGOA and get into the US market, taking advantage of the AGOA, duty-free provided, because we don't get for ready-made garments duty-free in US. We have to pay. The average tariff rate is about 15%. US GSP does not cover ready-made garments, most of the items. So they have gone to Ethiopia and Lesotho and exporting from there. So the Bangladesh Bank has opened up some of the opportunities over there. Pran is investing in Northeast India. So those type of things. But still the regime is a bit restrictive, I would say. On paper, very good, but actually there are various barriers. But on the other hand, it's trying the One-Stop Service Act that we have passed in 2018. But one problem, Sanjay, which is that we have passed the One-Stop Service, and Wakar was mentioning about the more than 100 signatures and now 56 signatures still. But One-Stop Service, which is supposed to be one-stop. For example, electricity, gas. If you don't produce, if you don't have those, the One-Stop Service Office cannot address those. So you will have to have permission, environmental permission. You can have a clause that silence is consent. If you don't give any permission within 15 days, yes or no, then it is yes after 15 days. So silence is consent. But with regard to, for example, electricity, gas, energy, if you don't have it, One-Stop Service Act will not resolve it. So the smart thing is that those obstacles like access to energy, gas, which do not allow FDI to come, you create opportunities for the FDI to go to those sectors, so that that obstacle is also gone. So that's how we see that in Bangladesh also now energy sector investment, etc., are also coming in a big way. We are also importing electricity from India. So in a big way, we are now thinking about the grid, regional grid, which Parash also mentioned. So I think that these are very important opportunities which are emerging, and we will need to take advantage of that. With regard to the SARC agreement for promotion of investment, I haven't followed the latest, Parash. I will look at it, and if I get some new information, I can share with you. But I think that there is a realization, at least in Bangladesh, that you see, just I will give you one example and then I will finish. This is a study by WTO Secretariat. The 12 LDCs which are graduating, the projected export loss of all these 12 LDCs because of loss of preferential market access, Bangladesh's share will be 90%. You see? So we cannot really sit around, and wait. We have been able to take most advantage among the LDCs thanks to the preferential market access. When these will be gone, we'll be the most hardest hit. So very simple. And that's where the 90% comes. So obviously, the policymakers are also thinking about regional, various going into regional, various trading arrangement, bilateral, multilateral, FTA, SEPA. So all these have been put in on cap, but these will have to be, as I said, the triangulation of investment, trade, transport, connectivity, and as also Sanjay mentioned today, also knowledge connectivity. So these will become very, very important. But with regard to the agreement on promotion of SARC agreement on promotion of investment, I don't know what is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rehman. Now we are close to the, end of the program, but I would like to, request first Radhesh Pantaji to give any, parting, words that he might have. And Radheshji, I have, a question with regard to output foreign direct investment. Nepal does need inward investment for sure, yes, for growth. Naturally, the investment board has over the years focused on, inward investment. But as we saw in Sanjay's report, the World Bank report, it makes a case for the importance of output foreign direct investment also, that it might even improve, exports. Oftentimes when we interact with, say, IT exporters, IT-related software exporters from Nepal, they say that foreign exchange regulations hurt their ability to, for example, set up, certain outlets or branches or liaison offices abroad. And the investment, the money that they need to take abroad is not that huge also. So it may not have much of a balance of payment concerns also. So what do you think, in your view, are there any takers of this argument in the policymaking community in Nepal, or what must be done in this regard?
Thank you very much. I think, basically, one of the areas where Nepal really has to improve is around, regulation. The government. See, the problem, the experience which I had in the banking also was basically a lot of banks came into being, and rather than, punishing a bad bank, the government really didn't have a good well, it had a good regulation, but basically on the inspection and regulating those banks, there is a dearth of capacity, I think. So essentially I agree with you. I think I agree with Sanjay also. I think to let a lot of these, small IT, there are a lot of outfits in Nepal currently working also and going through a lot of hassles. So basically, if government had the capability of really regulating these companies and making sure that the funds are not non-wanted or other kind of funds, but making sure that that the companies were working within the limit and within the regulation, then I think it's good. But the problem is, in Nepal, I don't think the government is really capable of doing that, or at least has not tried to. So in order for that not to happen, it's just easy to just restrict everything so that nothing gets done, and basically they could always say that it's for the to control the anti-money laundering and blah blah and the other things. So that's one thing. The other is the IT sector. I do believe that we have a lot of young entrepreneurs in Nepal, and definitely they could do well working from Nepal to the corporates in let's say the US or the other developed countries, and that's going on also. But if there were policies setting them free, I think it would really be beneficial for Nepal. In the other areas, however, I think apart from a few groups that I can see, maybe CG Group, which has invested abroad, as you know, and I know it's not per our law. I don't know how that has been done, but they're very countable. I think I personally feel in Nepal's in the situation that we are in, we hardly have much investments. We cannot compare ourselves with, say, Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, or definitely not India and even Pakistan, and even Maldives. Maldives is getting much more investments, I believe, than Nepal. So I think, I mean, I would say that first of all, we have to, make sure that there's a lot of capacity that we need to enhance internally at the local level. So in order to do that, we need to get investments. We need to really understand the technical know-how, what is really required in other parts of the world. And then, once we do that, then we probably would be in a situation to really be competitive, and would know exactly how, we can grow in other parts of the world, whereby the raw materials could be cheaper for us because we create our own value chain. But I see that as the maybe a medium term sort of plan, not immediately. Right now, what we really need is, from a fiscal standpoint, also we really need a lot of investments. We're talking about a lot of opportunities. I mean, our politicians are going on and saying, making a lot of promises, but in order for those promises to happen, first we need the capital. Secondly, we need the technical know-how, and third, we need to start building projects. Just to get confidence of Nepalese people, who will support investments, and once they see, because for people, I mean, you have to see how investments are making positive impact in our lives, and that really hasn't happened in Nepal, I think. So once they see that, and then slowly local firms would start growing. Slowly, capacity would be enhanced, and then we probably would be in a position to export investments, basically invest outside of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pant. Now, Dr. Ahmed, followed by Professor Mehta. I mean, if you have any final thoughts before we move to Dr. Kathuria.
Yes, I think probably just very brief thought that now that the COVID protocols have sort of come down, I think our boards of investment need to be meeting more. And it's time now that we should also invite SAARC Chamber of Commerce and Industry in this discussion. And probably they are the stakeholders here. And I believe that it's B2B interaction which must increase. In-person interactions are far more sort of profound in their impact. So I really hope that this discussion goes down to our relevant federal and, as I said, even subnational boards of investment, who can then take up some of the policy recommendations which Dr. Sanjay has presented. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Mehta, anything to add briefly?
Basically, one important issue which Dr. Kathuria has raised, and it's very important for Bhutan also, and relate to knowledge sharing. I'll talk more perspective from Bhutan perspective. I was talking to the BCCI, and one of the major challenges that they face today, the Bhutanese, in terms of connecting to the regional market, is limited knowledge about the availabilities of supply chains in this in the South Asia, especially when they have to procure inputs, equipments. There's very limited knowledge where they can procure all these things from South Asia, and what is the cost. At the end, they end up buying from the sources which are not very cost effective, as well as disadvantageous in long run. So if this kind of knowledge sharing through, as Bakar was talking about, from the Chamber of Commerce and Industries, if they can actually share these information and provide a repository of information, would be very helpful for small countries like Bhutan. Yeah, I have only this much to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Mehta. Now, finally, Sanjay, your final thoughts, what you have distilled from all these discussions.
Yeah, no, I think thank you very much to you, Paras, and to Posh and Swastik for this organizing this. I think it's very timely given the context where South Asia is, the context that Mustafiz very eloquently pointed out, the graduation, the impending, the sword hanging, and the urgent need to take on these challenges. And I think FDI, IF will be a critical element of that, both inward and outward. So I want to thank every single one of the discussants, Mustafiz, Sanjeev, Radesh, Fakar, Subhashini, for all their thoughts. And I will couple of 2 or 3 comments. So one is that this whole thing about, is it the right time to talk about outward investment given the macroeconomic situation, right? And we go into quite a lot of detail in the report on that, addressing that issue, right? And I think that there has to be, as I think even you said, Paras, that we're not talking about large sums of money. You can have a test experimental approach to relaxing the outward regime, as you said, and Radesh also. So IT exporters, they don't need much money, right, to get into that, even a small liaison office, right? You don't really need significant amounts of money. So start with small amounts. Small amounts can be automatic, larger amounts can go through the central bank or whatever. But outward investment is an integral part of a firm's overall growth strategy, right? So outward investment can bring in profits, repatriated profits, bring in knowledge of markets, technology. So you test the waters and see how it's going, right? And you may be pleasantly surprised that actually your net foreign exchange situation, if you have enough of it's not going to obviously bring in an immediate return, but you have, let's say, a 5-year horizon, then you might be pleasantly surprised at the net returns you get from having a more relaxed approach to foreign investment. So please start, do something experimental. And I think the graduation issue, and again, Mustafi's brought that out so well. But as long graduation and then the pressure to sign free trade agreements. But other than India, and even India has got a sort of started accelerating in 2022. But there hasn't been many really serious FTAs by any country in the region outside of India, right? So I'm not sure that countries are really prepared for the give and take of FTAs. Policymakers usually think, we get market access because we're going to lose market access. So FTA will guarantee us that we don't lose out, we don't have preference erosion. But that's not how an FTA works, right? As we economists know, there is reciprocity. Unlike the free world of unilateralism, FTAs mean reciprocity. Our policymakers really prepared for reciprocity? Even if you have, let's say, asymmetric, which usually poor countries or graduating countries will get asymmetric treatment. But how long, right? Let's say even 10 years down the line, will you have enough exportable products? Or then are you going to say, this FTA didn't really work for me because my deficit actually increased? So that's where it comes down, the hub of this whole seminar today and our report, FDI, right? FDI is the critical point for really taking advantage of an FTA. If you want to have something exportable, then you need to get in the technology and recognize of that continuum in international engagement. Eventually, every world-class firm is a multinational champion, right? Let's remember that. You can think of any firm in the world, right? It is a global firm. It doesn't operate, no matter how big the country, it doesn't operate within its borders, right? So policymakers need to remember, if their ambitions are to become upper middle income, like every country says it does, then that's the route, the longer term vision, starting with inward FDI, keeping an eye on outward FDI, and remembering that FTA is not a one-way street anymore. It's going to be both sides. So I think, again, these are the suggestions are very soft on the exchequer. That's the good thing. Smart policies for both inward and outward FDI, focusing on the knowledge, building on that nice the way that Mustafi's put it, that integration, all the kinds of connectivity culminating, in a trade connectivity. So I hope, we have this seminar, the findings or the outcomes of this get to some policymakers who are ready to, implement and listen. Thank you very much again, Paras and SAWTEE.
Thank you, Sanjay. For your excellent presentation and deliberation. And thank you all the panelists also, and everyone, all the participants, for staying late into the evening. And many issues have come forward. LDC graduation, for example, that investment could be an approach to counter the effects of LDC graduation, and the need for awareness raising, and also specific recommendations by way of further research on how a calibrated gradualist approach can be taken in each country for liberalizing outward foreign direct investment, taking into account specific contexts. I think we can take Sanjay's report as a basis and then do further research on it and provide country-specific recommendations further. And as far as this discussion is concerned, inputs from this deliberation will be used in a policy brief or a research brief that SAWTEE will be releasing. These discussions won't go down in vain. And our policy briefs, like other policy briefs, will be widely circulated, and we'll be approaching you for further inputs also if needed in due course. And the recording of this session will also be put online, and we'll be also preparing a report on the proceedings, which will go into the policy or research brief. So in short, Sanjay, will be in a way complementing your work in our own way further. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Paras. Thank you, Sanjay. Nice to see you once again.
Thank you.
Okay,
as always.
Care.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you, Sanjay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.